Creative Magic Club. What's up? This is Sarah Mack and welcome to Creative Magic Club. Together, we'll discover inspirational stories of creative entrepreneurs living out their dreams, doing the work they are most passionate about, and building wealth in magical and fun ways. While building a six-figure income as a writer and coach, helping other women to launch their dream businesses, I've connected with so many incredible people and seen it proven again and again that you can thrive financially doing whatever it is you are passionate about. I'm here to share life-changing strategies for mindset, making money, and reaching more people with your work in a business and life filled with creativity, freedom, and fun. Hi everyone, welcome. I'm so excited to introduce our guest today. We have Kelli Moore, who is the co-founder and CEO of Soulfire Productions, the premier podcast network for thought leaders, free thinkers, and visionaries. She's been the host of two top-rated podcasts, The Kelli Show and Okay Babe. And she's deeply passionate about helping people see themselves more clearly. She believes in setting ourselves free from expectations, people-pleasing, and the stories that hold us hostage in our own lives. She's also an Emmy Award-winning former sports TV host with an eye for truth and an ear for bullshit. She loves creating life-changing experiences for audiences and holding space for creatives to seek deeper within and become the most genuine expression of themselves. Hi, Kelli. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
So today I'm really excited to tap into Kelli's wisdom around podcasting, and we're going to share a bit about if podcasting is good for you and your business. So if that's something that you've been considering, and she's going to share some nuggets of wisdom around some of the things we might not know if you're heading into creating a podcast or if you already have a podcast. But before we dive into all of that, Kelli, can you tell us a little bit about your background? What's your story? How did you get to doing the work that you do today?
Yeah, well, like you mentioned, I was a TV host for about 14 years. And so I had, a lot of experience in production, being on camera, behind the scenes, writing, understanding what sounds good, what looks good, and what people, like to listen to and why. And so when I left that career, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And it just made sense for me to start a podcast. I had been on my own chronic healing journey for about 14, 15 years while I was in television. And I really longed to surround myself with women and create community. And I knew that really my only skills, aside from working at Lululemon for 6 months, was interviewing people and having conversations. So I created the podcast, I guess it's been a little over 4 years ago. And at the time it was called The Platform. And it was really about having conversations around chronic healing and how to use alternative medicine and just have transparency in the healing space, and provide women with resources and conversations that they hadn't had access to before. And so that was really the birth of my podcasting experience. And listening to podcasts prior to that was what really kind of was the catalyst for my healing journey, listening to different doctors and people who had been through similar experiences. And so I knew the power of podcasting. I knew the intimacy of it. And I met my now husband shortly after, I think a year after launching the podcast. And he was also in the podcast space. He had created podcasts. He was a podcast host. And we just kind of identified there were a lot of holes in the industry and we wanted to fix them. And so we, together with our now COO, Sam, created the foundation for Soulfire Productions. And really for us, it's community and transparency, because as you know, you're a podcast host. This space can be very isolating, very confusing. There's not a way to Google, these 5 steps will help you do whatever you want to do with your podcast. The information is just not readily available. And unfortunately, it's changing so much because it is such a new industry. Many of us have grown up listening to podcasts, but it's still really new compared to everything else. And so it's kind of the wild, wild west. And we wanted to empower our hosts to have information. We wanted to show them the ways to grow a show, strategize, monetize, all of those things, while also not having to be the ones to do every single logistic thing. So we created this to be a one-stop shop where you can give us all your audio, all your video. We'll create all your marketing assets. We'll do all of the show notes and editing and, make everything look really pretty. We'll post it for you. We'll email your guests. We have a mastermind for our hosts. So we are constantly sharing and teaching with them, and they're sharing and teaching with each other, which is really dope. And just having a place where people feel heard and understood and where they can ask questions and there's no dumb questions. And I don't pretend that we have every single answer out there, but we will do our best to support everyone in whatever way that looks. And also just to empower them to take ownership of their content and their messaging so that they can reach their goals within their businesses, to sell out programs or one-on-one clients or whatever that looks like.
Amazing. So what would you say are some of the main things to consider for people who haven't started a podcast yet, but are thinking about jumping in and doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pot stirrer. So, as someone who runs a podcast production company, it's kind of rare for someone to hear this, but I don't think everyone needs a podcast. And I believe that because I've seen people start podcasts and their community just didn't want one. They wanted their blog, they wanted their book, they wanted their social media videos, but they didn't want to hear them talk for an hour about whatever that is. And to your point, I think there's some questions we have to ask ourselves before we decide, is a podcast right for me and right for my community and my business? So one of those things is, are people asking you for it? If you're the only one who thinks you should have a podcast, maybe you need to reconsider why you think that and if it's right for you. Because if your community has been consuming your content in blogs and video form for 5-10 years, and that's what they love, and then all of a sudden you've decided, hey, I'm going to have a podcast. Are you a good speaker? Do you have content that's engaging that makes sense in a podcast? If people aren't DMing you, asking you to have a podcast or where can I listen to you talk more about this, then maybe that's not the right medium for you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, do you have an actual goal for the show in mind? I have a lot of people who come to us who want to work with us. And this is one of the first questions I ask: what's the goal of the show? And they have no idea. They haven't thought about that. If you're not clear on the goal of the show and how it directly feeds into your business, how you're going to make money from it, how you're using it as a funnel, where you're sending people, how you're talking to them, where your community is coming from, then it's going to fall flat, plain and simple. Because if you don't have clarity yourself as the host, it's going to be confusing for your listeners and potential listeners. So they're not going to know how to find you. They're not going to know what to expect from the show. And they're not going to know what to do once they get there. It's like, okay, I'm listening to this show, but where's the value? Where am I being taken in this process? Most people want to listen to a podcast to learn something, right? And oftentimes, especially in the business space, you come to a podcast, you want to learn something, and then you want them to give you a course or a journal or a program or something where you can take that and really start implementing it. But if you don't have a clear funnel in your own business, then people will just stop listening because they really want someone who's going to take them through that process. And I think the last thing that I would say is, if you're not ready to commit to 4 episodes a month, to showing up on social media, to marketing this really hard, to being a guest on other podcasts at least 4 to 6 times a month, then I would say the space is probably not for you. And that doesn't mean that you want to have 2 podcast episodes a month and that's what you're going to do and call it a day. That's great if that aligns with your goals. But what we see is that people have these amazing goals of growth and reach, and I'm going to fill out this program and do this stuff, but they really want to put in minimal effort. And unfortunately, in the podcast space, it's really hard to have your show found because of the way Apple Podcasts and Spotify work. And so if you're not constantly showing up and consistent every single week at the same day, same time, with content that they can expect and know is coming from you, then you're going to get lost in the shuffle of the 20-something podcasts that most people have in their feed, and they're not going to know what to expect. And so you become that inconsistent thing in their life that they no longer care about because someone else is showing up more consistently. So I think making sure you have 4 episodes, making sure you're consistent every single week, and that people know what to expect from you. If you're just not willing to do that, then I would say maybe reconsider if this is the right time for you.
Before we get back to the episode, I have something exciting to tell you about. There were a couple of key things that changed everything in my life as an entrepreneur that allowed me to bring in 6 figures while working half as many hours and having more fun than ever before in my business. It was money mindset work around how I was doing business, combined with getting good at sharing strategic sales content online. I know you know that this is your year to start hitting your 10K month income goal and living the life of creative freedom and fulfillment you have been dreaming about. You're ready to be consistently attracting total dream soulmate clients through the creative content you're sharing on social media, and you want to be reaching more people, charging higher rates, and working much less. So I'm very excited to invite you to join me in Freedom Club, my mastermind, where you'll receive tailored high-level support to master the skills that will create your dream life and six-figure dream business starting now. With focused weekly trainings and coaching calls to find the clarity on your content that's going to make you the most money, to design a simple, fun launch strategy you'll enjoy following through on, plus daily support and feedback from me in the Voxer chat, you'll find that sweet spot in your business where you're the most confident in your work, having the most fun, and making the most money. Go to withsarahmac.com/freedom club to apply now. Now let's get back to the episode. Yeah, I think that's such an important message. And one analogy that I use quite a lot with this is like, with a creative project, it's kind of like having a baby, right? It's like when you push a baby out, you're not just then like, oh, I don't really feel like feeding the baby today.
Yeah.
I don't really feel like putting the baby to sleep and giving the baby a bath today. It's like, you can make that choice, but it's going to have a very direct impact on the baby and the well-being of the baby. Like, same thing with your creative projects. Even if you don't feel like being really consistent with it, like, it's going to impact the health of that creative project. And yeah, consistency is so important and so powerful. Like, that's one thing that I love so much about having a podcast, like, over just, social media content, which is like gone within the blink of an eye into the abyss of the algorithm, right? Like, I love checking my stats and just seeing how it builds over time. And it's so rewarding to get that like constant growth and that constant feedback. And then people start telling you like, oh, I listened to your podcast, and then they sign up for your offers. And yeah, it's super, super fun. So I have a question for you. Obviously, like, I'm familiar, and I'm sure most of my audience are familiar with the idea of having a podcast to reach more people, and then bringing them into your world, to your coaching business, and then getting people to sign up for your email list, downloading a freebie, signing up for your offers, and like, that's how you monetize your podcast. I'm curious about, like, are there other ways to monetize a podcast? Like, I really don't know of any ways other than that, so I'd be curious to hear from you.
Yeah. So obviously the best way to make money on your podcast is to have your own offers. And especially we work with a lot of small to medium sized podcasts. And so getting advertisers at a really high rate is, no, I wouldn't say impossible, but you really have to prove that you can sell really well in order to do that. So, and also you only take a percentage of what you're selling. When it's your own offers, you're taking a very large percentage, if not everything, from what you sell. So I always tell everyone, from the very beginning, advertise your own stuff, have very clear offerings. Like you said, having a freebie to get people on an email list. That is one thing I see podcasters miss out on all the time. Something that they can opt into that actually gives them a lot of value is the best way to engage with your community. So definitely doing that. Love that you brought that up first. Second way, like I said, advertising, working with different brands. So really for podcasters, having a media kit to pitch yourself to brands is really important. And also pitching yourself to brands that you actually use and love. If you're a small to medium-sized podcast, I would go after small to medium-sized brands. Go after new brands who maybe are new to the podcasting space. Maybe you've done influencer deals with them on Instagram. And you're like, hey, I have this audience over here that I'm building. I would like to do a social media and podcast deal with you so that my listeners are not only hearing about it, but they're seeing me use this on social media and vice versa. And that's where we see the highest ROI for our hosts. So talking to the brand, I'll just use Branch Basics, for example. I'm working with them right now. It's a non-toxic cleaning company. It's female owned and run. Love what they do. I've been using their stuff for the last 4 years. I think they're amazing. And so we approached them and said, hey, we want to do a deal with you. It would be social and podcast. I'll do these stories. I'll talk about this on the podcast. And it's easy for me because I've been using it for so long, and I share with them my history of moving into the non-toxic space because of my chronic illness. I'm pregnant now. I really want my home to be super clean. And I really want to support a female-run business. And so they love that, right? Their immediate answer was like, yes, let's do this, because I showed my genuine interest and use and love of the product. I think that's where a lot of people miss out, is they don't do that. They're like, hey, send me free shit. And it's like, brands don't want to do that, right? They want to have that engaged interaction with the host as well as their listeners. So sending a media kit, telling them why you love working with them, and then giving them fair prices. A lot of people outprice themselves because we all decided that we have to price ourselves what we're worth. I don't know about you, but I don't think I'm worth $1 million and I don't think I'm worth $15. Like, I think I'm a person. And so being really careful about how you price yourself based on what your ROI is. So say you price yourself at $1,000 for 4 ads on your podcast, but you are only getting 250 downloads an episode. How are you going to make that $1,000 back for the brand with your sales? You have to have an insanely loyal audience. And maybe you do. Maybe every single one of those people is buying $100-something worth of product, and that's how you're going to hit $1,000. Probably not, though. So what you do is you price yourself out of that deal, and then they're no longer going to work with you because they're going to say, well, you're not worth that. Or they're going to ask you to cut your pricing by, half or more. And you're like, well, I'm not worth that. Right. So we have to just have really honest conversations with ourselves about running ads. And then the last thing is you can have a paid community. So a lot of podcasters are using things like Patreon, Discord, Telegram. I'm sure there's many more than that. And you can create your own on your website as well. But having a paid community where, say you post 45 minutes of your podcast episode, but there's another, 15 minutes to half an hour left, they get the 45 minutes for free on Apple. And then you create a paywall so that they have to go over somewhere else to listen to the rest of the episode. People get annoyed by this, but also people love it because they know that they're getting that extra content and they're getting extra value from you. And it's a great way to build community behind a paywall. And if you're someone who talks about things that get censored, which is like basically all of us at this point, having a paywall is really helpful because you can say whatever you want behind that, right? And a lot of comedians and entertainers have done that, but I've seen it a lot more in the health and wellness space, personal development, spirituality, sexuality. They're creating paywalls now because we're getting censored left and right for saying anything and everything on Instagram, on YouTube, in emails. It's like, where can we go? And so paywalls are really helpful, and having different tiers. So maybe someone comes in and they pay $5 to be able to listen to the rest of your episode. But if they pay $15, they get a live Q&A on Zoom with you. Maybe they get some free merch or they get discounts on your one-on-one programs. So just giving people options for how they can interact with you at different tiers is a great way to continue to bring people over from the podcast and show them that you have more to offer, that this is my free resource. Yay. Giving all of this to you for free here. But if you want more from me, this is where I'm really building community of people that want to make moves and change and all of that in their lives.
So many great ideas to monetize your creativity, build community around your work. I love it so much. Thank you so much for sharing those. Mm-hmm. And what would you say are like the most impactful ways to grow an audience around a podcast? And, really what is the work that's required to do that?
Yeah. So a lot of people have kind of coined the term podcast tours, basically going on a bunch of other podcasts as a guest and talking about your own work, your own show. If you're not doing this at least 4 to 6 times a month for 3 or 4 months at a time, taking a break and then going back to it, you're really missing out on building community. I've talked to people at all of the biggest networks that there are, and I've asked them the same question. I'm like, how do people build audiences? What are y'all doing? Like, are you running paid ads? How are you doing this? And they said, honestly, just sharing things on other podcasts, whether it's our host going on there or running an ad for a show. I mean, we all listen to true crime. You hear an ad for an upcoming episode or new series on Serial. And so that then everyone goes and downloads that podcast. And so it's just using communities to get to other communities. That's what a podcast tour is. I come on your show. I talk about what I do. I share Soulfire. Your community comes to the Soulfire website, is engaged. Maybe they listen to my podcast after that. And it's the best and most organic way to grow a show. And these agencies have told me, like, don't spend money on advertising because it doesn't translate. And there's really no way to track it either, because of the way the podcast space is set up. So I think that sharing on other podcasts, if you know of other podcasts that are aligned with you that you can also run ads for, run ads on their show for your stuff, then that's another great way to do it. But the other thing is video. A lot of podcasters don't understand how important video is for the marketing and growth of their show. We've seen this multiple times with podcasts that we've had, and honestly, it's blown my mind. I knew it was important. I didn't know it was this important. They've had shows for 4 or 5 years. and they've never used video. All of a sudden, we start creating IGTVs and Reels and YouTube for them, and their shows grow by triple the downloads very quickly. And the reason is because podcasting is such an intimate space. And so you're inviting people in. And so they want to feel welcomed in by you personally. And that's what videos do. They are short snippets of a podcast with information that's highly shareable. And it says, hey, I'm cool. I have a welcome open space here. You want to come hang out with me. And so creating videos that are highly shareable based on what's happening in the podcast, whether it's during the interview or the solo episode, or afterwards of you teaching about it, that is what makes a huge difference for shows growth.
Amazing. So many great tips. And what would you say, like, what's the main message on your heart that you really wish more people knew about podcasting?
I wish that people were just more clear with their content and messaging. It's one thing that I see all the time. So much of what we do is production, yes, but a lot of it is strategy and a holistic view at people's businesses and what is working and what's not. And so many times I'm just seeing these massive gaps and holes, and things are not streamlined and cohesive. It's like, I think I'm talking to this audience, but in reality, you're actually talking to this audience. And you think that this offering makes sense, but it has nothing to do with the messaging of the podcast, but you expect people to understand that. And why are they not clicking on this? Because you didn't make it easy for them. There's just so many things that people are not clear on, whether it's content, messaging, strategy, or the format of how they've laid out their funnel. And so when we get really clear on that and help people see, because we're on the outside, right? When we're inside our own business, it's really hard to see what's not working. We're like, this doesn't work and I don't get it. Someone help me. And so we come in and we're able to take a look, like bird's eye view, and put everything together and say, these are the holes. This is where it doesn't make sense. I put myself in the position of that person's listener or potential client and say, you said this and I don't get it. Or you said this and then I didn't know where to go. And so that's really helpful, is to have someone giving you input and feedback into where things don't make sense in your business, because that is such a reflection of the podcast. And you want to make the podcast work for you. And what I see so often is that people are working for their podcast, and it's so much harder than it needs to be.
That is so true. And, you know, it's like the same strategy for a business. Like, you have to know who you're talking to. What are you saying to them? Why are you saying that to them? Mm-hmm. And what do you want them to do next? And I think for me personally, you know, I started my podcast just as like, it was an inspired impulse, right? I was really excited to be able to just have another way to express myself creatively, because I feel like I express myself creatively a lot in my social media marketing. And so it really appealed to me to have this, like a more, like you said, a more intimate space. And you know, I'm very driven by freedom. And so it was very enticing to me to give myself this framework of like, you can do whatever you want with your podcast. And so I was doing that, and it was super fun. And, you know, obviously my background is in copy and content strategy. So I was always within like a very clear framework, and I set that intention for my messaging, but I was still like quite broad in my content. And then as I've gone on, it's like, yeah, anytime you put your heart and your soul and your time and your energy into creating a piece of content, you want it to work for you, and you want it to, you know, be a piece that really is supporting your community to get where you want them to go. Mm-hmm. And so it's just been like deeper and deeper levels of strategy and clarity, and really like finding my way with it. And I think that's also one of the beautiful things about just being consistent, right? Is you get so much data around what does well, what doesn't do well, what people like, what translates into sales and money. So yeah, I can't say enough good things about having a podcast. It's such a fun, like creative way to be making money, reaching more people, having a bigger impact, but it is work. Like it's definitely work, and it's definitely a commitment. But yeah, I love this conversation so much. Thank you for sharing all of the wisdom that you have brought to the show today. So please tell everybody who's interested in learning about you and your work, where can they find you? What have you got going on?
Yeah, so on Instagram, you can find Soulfire Productions Co., as well as my personal is Kelli T. Moore. And then our company website is soulfireproductionsco.com. And you can reach out and ask any questions at any time. I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much, Kelli.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining. Please leave us your comments and your questions and anything that came up for you around this episode, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
For more inspirational content, head over to my website withsarahmac.com And please support the show by liking, commenting, and subscribing.